Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hey, and happy Friday. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
We talked about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon this week.
We did.
I kind of love this story. I mean, I don't love the idea of people being completely gripped by fear. But I do like that it's just an interesting social examination of a lot of things, right? It's obviously used, we said, all the time as like, this is how mass hysteria works. But I also am really fascinated by how condensed this whole thing is. Like, it was already being questioned as a possible hoax just 6 days after it hit the paper. So it was a pretty short, burn time on that. Which is something I think we think of as something that would be very modern and associated with the speed with which information passes around in the digital age. But that kind of thing could happen even in 1944. One thing we didn't talk about in this that comes up a little bit, not a ton. It has shown up, I noticed, in a few modern write-ups that aren't necessarily heavy on, they feel like they're not very heavy on research, is that part of the mass hysteria element is that so many of the incidents were reported by women.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing to consider there is that this was also happening during World War II, when there were a lot of men not around. And, so of course, just proportionately, there would be more women.
Right.
And that, in terms of a mass hysteria event, it does also start to make a lot more sense because it was a time that was just scary to live in. We were in a world war. So I think people were probably just on edge. So that's kind of interesting. Here's another factoid. Mattoon is no bigger than it was then. It still hovers between 17 and 18,000 residents as of, I think, 2022. I'm not sure. I wrote the number and not the date that I looked up, but it was within the last 2 years. So still not a big town. About the same. And I do want to talk about Scott Maroon's book more, because it is an interesting read, and he lays out the case as, his reasons for coming to those conclusions pretty clearly. I mean, he states, I don't remember if it was in the book or if it was in an interview, that he really truly believed that he thought Farley Llewellyn wanted to blow up the entire town, and that was his goal. And there was apparently an incident that happened several weeks before any of this started, where there was an explosion at Farley's lab that this author thinks was the precursor of him developing whatever this toxic thing was. But there's no real knowledge about it. There's also the suggestion that as it started to hit the papers and people started to investigate this person, that his sisters may have helped him. But again, all conjecture. We don't have real, there's no hard evidence. It's all kind of guesswork, which is, I mean, I don't want to invalidate. That's an interesting theoretical road to go down, but I don't want any of our listeners to think aha, the sisters. No.
That's the answer.
We don't know. I'm pretty dismissive of the paranormal silliness around it. I'm just no, there's no mystery creature that's running around doing this.
Right.
It's either a random person or a mass hysteria event. Boy, if I were the Atlas Company, I'd be mad as hornets.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, I think anybody that's, whether you are a single person or a huge conglomerate company, if you just woke up tomorrow and no one had ever talked to you but suddenly accuses you of a pretty serious thing that has really led to a lot of fear and stress, wouldn't you be no, nobody even said anything. What is this?
Yeah,
this
your inspector has not even been here.
No one came here. You just kind of made this up. And there are people that just think that the police made that story up to try to get the heat off of them because people were criticizing their police work.
Okay.
I mean, it's layers upon layers of maybe and perhaps, we think this could be a motivation. This is why I don't think this is a Halloween episode. To me, this is not spooky. Stress, certainly, it's very frightening to think somebody could be doing something. But because there wasn't any, did not end with any serious consequences in terms of no one perished.
Sure.
The worst thing is a person that reported having a burning sensation and may or may not have gone to the hospital for it.
Right.
And because it all kind of came and went so fast. And I, as an example of how quickly this whole thing came and went, I randomly stumbled across a little write-up in the paper. Okay, this all took place from, or the primary reports in the paper were like from September 2nd until like the 13th was the last day because they were reporting that announcement by the police. And at that point, no more attacks were happening. Attacks, I'm using air quotes.
Mm-hmm.
A week later, on September 20th, there is a write-up in the local paper that was doing all of these reports noting that Urban Rafe, who was one of the people whose home was attacked, bowled a 507 for 3 games in the commercial and Catholic parish leagues. And there's no mention at all of like linked to the recent scare. Like there's it doesn't even come up at all. It's literally just like, he had a great night bowling. And I'm like, all right, they kind of got over it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I also do want to talk about how much we mentioned it in the show, but it really, really troubled me reading about the otherism of the Llewellyn family.
Right.
Like there really are, it is very, I mean, we did a very sanitized version of like how many things were attributed to them that might be like suspicious. And some of it is even just like weird commentary about like their personal appearance. Like, oh, those sisters were very heavy and their hair didn't look good. And it's like, suspected criminals. Like I'm like, you guys,
yeah,
you can't scapegoat an entire family because even if they were super eccentric, like that doesn't, you're making it up. I have strong feelings on this matter. Don't do that to people. Don't do it. You don't know. Anyway, that's the Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Yeah.
It's been on my list for a while, and I finally was like, let's just I was in a mood to pick through old newspapers, which happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I love looking at old newspapers, but sometimes it's hard to find the time to piece stuff together. I was in the mood.
It was on my list for a while also after hearing, so I don't know if it was after hearing the episode of the podcast, The Memory Palace, which is about this, which like did come out at the end of October and I think was intended as kind of a Halloween episode. It's very eerie and if you're not familiar with the Memory Palace, these are like very short, almost poetic sort of snapshots of historical people and events. I love them a lot. And so it's like only 5 minutes or something long. And so I don't know if it was that or a different show. Like I heard about this, heard the basics of it somewhere. And I had been like, maybe I could do a podcast on that. And then I think I poked at it briefly and was like, I don't know. And then moved on to something else and never thought about it again.
I thought about it a lot. So now it's here.
We talked about impressing child actors into working.
So the takeaway is that all humans are garbage and they always have been.
Yeah, I was really, like I said in the episode, I sort of knew that anyone could be impressed.
Right.
And I knew that like there were adult craftspeople who would be pressed into service for whatever reason. I did not know that about the children's companies, and that it was just okay to press children into work as first chorus singers and then actors, but not really actors, but singers. Not acting, no, only singing. Was kind of how that went down. So this court complaint, I do often really enjoy reading something that was written in English a long time ago and has spellings that aren't standard today and, word constructions that aren't standard today. This particular one, though, was just really fatiguing. It did not have the long S's that look like F's that you see in a lot of older documents, but all of the U's were V's.
Oh, yeah.
And all of the J's were I's. And all of the words were spelled differently than we usually spell them today. And there was so much of, and the said, so-and-so, aforesaid, and the said. And just, as we said, really long sentences. Like, it felt like the sentence was just going on. Like, it was all one sentence. It was really hard. And I kept having to take little breaks. And then I was reading a paper that included some different documents that I started reading, and I was like, man, how is this is so much harder than the other one. And it dawned on me after a few words that it was because it had all of those same traits about different letters being print because of typesetting, like different letters being used because of type, and also unusual spellings that aren't used today. But also it was in French. And I was like, oh, right, this is why it's harder, because I'm also reading French. And it was in straightforward enough French that I was actually able to pick my way through it. But then also right out underneath it, the author of the paper had a translation, and I was like, oh, thank you. Thank you.
This extra tickles me on the heels of our dictionary episodes.
Mhm.
Thinking about Webster trying to simplify all of the spellings of everything, and mostly
Yeah.
that being kind of awkward looking and confusing.
Yeah, this one had a lot of more extra letters, more you know.
Flourish.
Yes. Lots of more double letters when we would not likely see them today, either in the United States or in England. Like, there are some things that are like spelling differences that continue until today, but this had a lot more beyond that. I was not totally aware of just how many of those large, round, 3-story, open in the center theaters had been built. I knew that there was more than one, because there was a whole rivalry involved. But as I was sort of making the list, and I got up to like 5 theaters that had been built by this point, and then there were some more that were built after it that we did not even talk about. I was like, oh, it's a little more theaters than I quite realized.
Yeah, I mean, that's what there was to do, right? That's it. It wasn't like we could go to the theater or a hockey game or stay home and watch television. It was
Right. No.
we could go to the theater, toil in the fields.
Yeah.
I know it's not that simple. Please don't
No.
anybody think that I think all that people did was toil in fields.
No, we're gonna get some kind of call out thread by yeah. I kept thinking about Tilney, the master of the revels, who is often depicted as kind of a tyrant in terms of the theater. And it kept reminding me of the movie Shakespeare in Love, which I know has mixed reviews. I personally super enjoy it.
I have a very specific anger about it, but
that's okay. Are you gonna tell me?
Well, I have a double specific anger about it, I should say.
Okay.
One, I mean, before I say any of this, Judi Dench, untouchable and perfection.
Okay.
And her costume's always exquisite. There were some weird costume things in some parts, but my big beef was that, of course, Gwyneth Paltrow won Best Actress that year, and it should have been Cate Blanchett for Elizabeth, which to me was the far superior film.
Sure.
I mean, that movie is like knock my socks off good.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare in Love, I was like, really? Fluff got awarded when it's not all fluff. I know it was very hard. Many people love it. But for me, it felt like a travesty. I know award shows are, whatever. But
yeah, they are. Those are both movies that I saw in the theater by myself when they came out.
Oh, God.
But yeah.
Elizabeth.
There's a moment in Shakespeare in Love where Tilney, the master of the revels, is trying to shut down the performance, and Judi Dench as Queen Elizabeth barks his name in a way that causes the whole room to freeze, and that just kept ringing in my head while I was working.
She's quite spectacular. That's all.
Yes.
Adore.
Anyway, I'm glad to have had a thing that was not 19th century New England. And the thing that's absolutely beckoning me for the next thing to work on is, again, 19th century New England. I'm like, come on. I just said we were going to do some stuff that was not that. But I was on a walk over the weekend and I found a historical marker that called to me. So
there you go.
We'll see. I actually do. We're going to have Unearthed soon. Unearthed is what's being worked on next. Maybe by the time I'm done with working on Unearthed, my mind will have rested on something else that it's really excited about for an episode. Because those episodes are the best ones. The ones that our minds are the most excited about.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. So, happy Friday again. Whatever's on your plate this weekend, I hope it's great. We'll be back with the Saturday Classic tomorrow, but with a brand new episode on Monday. Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.